Welcome back to CISO Setup, where we talk cybersecurity, operations, leadership, and what it really takes to build resilient organizations. I'm your host, Lauren. Today, we're tackling a timely topic as we head through the mid-year. Is your cybersecurity program on track for 2026? Mid-year is the perfect time for companies to pause, assess progress, and make smart adjustments before year-end pressure kicks in. Joining me today are Heidi, CISO's GRC team lead, and Joe, CISO's CEO. Both have been guests on the podcast previously, so we're going to jump right in. Joe, let's start with you. Why is mid-year such an important checkpoint for organizations?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Lauren. Hey, thanks, Heidi. From my experience, a lot of companies, they're on a calendar year budget. And, now we're a little bit over halfway through the year. It's time to make sure that you're on track to hit your goals while there's still time to course correct. So the reality is a lot of companies I work with, I don't know how many of you have seen this in the past, but they don't have their budgets approved until almost halfway through the first quarter. Like you're in a February budget still unapproved, but leadership, last year you were talking about what you're going to get done this year. They're still expecting you're going to hit the end of the year in December with all that work being done. And really, it's the expectations that you have full 12 months to get all that stuff finished. So, more than likely, you have like 3 quarters to do 12 months of work you've committed to. And then on top of that, we always get to the end of the year and it's so hard to rein everybody in when you get to the holidays. And so you might want to, set your project completion dates for mid-November, right before Thanksgiving, especially if you're responsible for this and as to support your personal goal at your company, one of your goals you've been assigned. So what does that give you? It's like 8.5 months really to do a year's worth of work and hit all your goals. So, kind of framing that up, I have a simple mental model for how I like to think about a security program working. It's first it's the engine and then it's improving the engine. And so, I'll talk a little bit about what the engine is, but jump in if you all have questions or comments. The engine, to me, is the agreed upon approved processes that keep the machine of your ISMS, your information security management system, your security program working. So it's the processes. And it's basically what do you do on a regular basis? And then on top of that, you have the second part, the process improvement projects. So these are the changes you make to make your program continuously improve. So when your engine isn't running right, you need to fix it. So when you have to fix the machine, so sometimes you find problems where your program isn't working. It could be audit findings, customer questions that you don't know how to answer, or I hope not, but incidents that you wish you didn't have. And I like the ISO 27001 terminology. We call those nonconformities when your program just isn't doing what you expected. So then you need to do your corrective action plan or POAMs in this terms for this stuff. And sometimes your business might make decisions and suddenly outgrow the engine you built. So imagine an acquisition or some kind of business change, and all of a sudden the scale of what you're supposed to do just went like crazy based on what you were planning. And so you find that your engine, your program is no longer adequate to drive the machine of your ISMS. And so this is where you have this is where having a good corrective action planning process helps a lot. And so if your corrective action plans and growth plans are aligned with, what leadership expects and what you've been talking to them about, then you should have the processes in place to have a discussion to get the resources you need to fix the program or to get leadership to agree to the risks of not making, if they didn't make those investments. And so kind of where are we at now in your budget? You've set your budget last year. You moved into this year, early 2026 with, waiting for the budget to get approved. It got approved. You started projects. And hopefully by now you've committed to doing the projects required to enhance the machine of your ISMS. And you kind of get into that place where things are working. And so the last part I like to think about is reporting. Leadership wants to know, are the things you're doing, are they working? So it's important to routinely tell them a couple of things. One is, how effective is the security program right now? The machine, is it working properly? And two, what is your progress of using the budget and resources they gave you to improve it? So good communication, that brings credibility, and it brings good credibility to how you're running your program, and it lets leadership know that you're using resources they've assigned responsibly. And if you don't have those major components, the machine, the basic ISMS processes, ways to improve the machine and correct problems, and good reporting, this is where I love to talk to you. So give me a call and I'll talk through it, and we'll figure out how you can get that set up. So, that's my high level thought on how that stuff works. So back to you, Lauren.
That's a really great analogy. Thank you. And I hope some people take you up on that offer. Heidi, from a GRC perspective, how can the mid-year be a checkpoint for program progress?
Yeah, I agree. I like that analogy. And I think Joe really highlighted on something that organizations do experience quite a bit. So like even us in the security team, when we have a clear roadmap in January, they might not have that final budget approval until partway through that first quarter. So that means we're often trying to accomplish 12 months of objectives in a much shorter time frame. And we're the executors of those objectives. So from the GRC perspective, that's also why a mid-year checkpoint is so important. By this point in the year, you can start measuring whether the program is progressing at the pace needed to achieve those year-end goals. Are key initiatives on track? Are the corrective actions closing as expected? Are compliance commitments moving forward? Are risks being reduced as planned? Like those are the sort of things that we check mid-year for GRC. So this gives your organization an opportunity to validate assumptions or adjust those priorities and make those informed risk-based decisions while there's still time to course correct. So it's much easier to address those issues now than to discover them in fourth quarter when critical projects have fallen behind. And like Joe had said, usually by end of fourth quarter, people are busy. They've got holiday things going on, other end of year things to wrap up. So it's good to just adjust those priorities mid-year and course correct so we can get those things taken care of.
And that's a great segue for my next question. From a GRC lens, what are the signs a cybersecurity program may be off track?
I think one of the first signs is lack of visibility. If leadership can't answer basic questions around the current risks or compliance status, or the health of like the key security initiatives that we're working through, that's usually a warning sign that the program isn't being monitored effectively. But some other common indicators are like risk assessments haven't been updated to reflect the current business conditions. Business conditions change often as well. So we need to make sure that assessments reflect that. Controls are documented, but they're not consistently being performed. That's another key indicator. Audit findings or corrective actions, they remain open for extended periods, or they get multiple extensions. That sort of thing needs to be reprioritized. Compliance deadlines are approaching, and there's no ownership to certain things. Vendor or third-party reviews are overdue. I think that's one thing that gets overlooked a lot. Teams are spending more time reacting to issues than proactively managing them. And that's one of the things we talked about earlier this year is being more proactive on things. So when those things start piling up, there's often symptoms of maybe like an underlying governance issue rather than technology issue. So the earlier you identify them, then the easier they are to correct.
That's really powerful. Lack of visibility often becomes the real issue.
Yeah, and I love all that stuff you both hit on. If you're truly running a security program like an ISMS that could pass an external audit, then you'll pretty quickly see where you're off track. And all the indicators Heidi mentioned, that's spot on. When you're tracking your security with spreadsheets or tools, you quickly see if you're creating new nonconformities where systems are breaking down because the evidence isn't there, and you're totally missing those deadlines. Heidi, you've spent some time with compliance automation tools. What are your thoughts on how compliance automation tools can help keep track of everything, from keeping it organized to putting in tickets and getting the queues and work in place to drive it to completion?
Yeah. Well, my team does work with automation tools and does manual like GRC management. So we do find that the automation helps solve one of like the biggest challenges we have in GRC, and that's that visibility and accountability across a lot of moving parts. So when you're looking at controls, there's a lot of controls and a lot of objectives and controls. So you could have dozens of control owners, hundreds of evidence requests, remediation items, vendor reviews, and compliance requirements. So trying to manage all of that manually becomes difficult, especially as a program matures. So automation helps by centralizing those requirements. It helps with like assigning ownership and tracking due dates, collecting evidence, creating reminders before things become overdue. And then some in these tools also, when they can be integrated with a ticketing system, then we can also route work directly to the teams responsible for completing it. So that helps turn the compliance activities into operational tasks. And a lot of security teams have a operational mindset. So it really helps when they have a ticket they can turn to, rather than some like separate administrative exercise that they might not be as interested in. Um, so at the end of the day, automation doesn't replace governance, but it does make it much easier to sustain governance at scale.
Yeah, and that's good. And I think I've seen your team do this, but you don't really care which compliance automation system you're working with, do you? You just jump into whatever it is.
Hmm.
They're all seem to be similar enough in concept, even though there's some that work better than others for us. But you don't really
Absolutely.
care, do you?
No, we definitely learn and adapt to any tool. We've worked with many tools, and pick up other tools as they come to us.
No, that's great. Yeah. So, Lauren, what do you think?
I think we're going to move down the budget. Speaking of tools at the mid-year. So, Joe, budgets are tighter everywhere right now. How should leaders think about program spending mid-year?
Yeah. Well, I think about how are you properly using your investments? Your entire program should be focused on and based on reducing business risk. And you should focus on addressing the vulnerabilities that will impact your business the most. So those highest risk items. And there's a few layers of that. Typically I see you start with normal IT security risk management. You identify what could go wrong and then connect that to what's important to the business. And that's not always easy to do, especially if you're not talking to business leaders. So you really need to have that business level conversation. But once everybody's aligned on where to make investments, then you need to be responsible with using that budget. And so at this point in the year, some things could go wrong, and it could go wrong in two different ways. One is you could be way spending over budget and not really having leadership realize that's happening and keeping them up to speed with where you're at. Or, and I've seen it go the other way, which is you fall behind in projects, you're not getting the work done, you're not spending the money that was allocated that you convinced them last year that you should have, and then you're not spending that money and those resources wisely. And so one, if you go over budget, well, that's not good, especially if that's not being expected. But two, and a lot of people don't think about the negative impact of not spending all the budget. They're like, hey, we came in under budget, but what does that mean? Well, finance is usually sitting out there thinking, all right, we are having this much money allocated to improve these parts of the business. That's what we told the board. That's what we told all the leaders. And when you're coming in way under budget and you're not getting the work done, another department might have been able to use that money to solve a different business problem. And that business problem could have been the fix that just accelerated everything for the year for the whole organization. And so if you're if you're behind schedule and not solving the most important security problems while having the resources to do it, then you better hope you don't have an incident that could have been avoided because of something you put in place. And at the same time, if you're not really using the resources that have been given to you, somebody else in your work probably could use it. So keep that in mind. And it's one of the things that it's rare that cybersecurity leaders get the ability to assign the budget directly. So what I typically see is that you need to make sure that you have processes for getting risk acceptance from top leadership for business risks that they don't want to fund. So if they don't want to give you the resources to do it, you might be sitting there on the hook for, maybe I didn't communicate very well to top leadership that this is the impact the business will have. You're not getting the money to fix the stuff. So at that point, if they didn't know it's a problem and you haven't convinced them it's something they need to fix, that's kind of on you. I'm always looking to help protect security leaders by giving them the tools, giving them the processes to be able to go to management and say, here's what could really go wrong in the business. Here's what I need to fix it. And it's kind of out of my hands to do any more than I can with the resources you already gave me. And we're kind of stuck. So at this point, if we really want to drive this risk into a better state, I need these resources, or you need these resources. And if you communicate that properly, and then you can get those leaders to say, you know what, we're going to fund that. On the other hand, we're not going to fund this other stuff. Hopefully that not going to fund the other stuff comes along with, and we accept the risk that you told us could happen, if, the bad thing does occur. And so I like to kind of think about it as like a balancing act. You need to communicate. You need to get acceptance for the things that could go wrong if they don't fund it. But if they give you the money, you need to use it wisely.
Yep.
That's a really great point and calls out the fact that most cybersecurity teams are collaborative in nature and want to work with the organization as a whole. If a company realizes that they're behind, though, how should they reset without causing chaos?
It's a loaded question, Lauren. Without causing chaos. So that also depends on the customer themselves. Do need to understand their business risk tolerance. And then then that first step is to prioritize. So when an organization realizes that they're behind, the instinct is often to try and fix everything at once. And that usually creates more confusion than progress. So instead, we try to encourage them to take a step back, identify the initiatives that have the biggest impact on business risk, compliance obligations, and then the overall organizational objectives. And then from there, we'll reevaluate priorities, confirm ownership for those open action items, communicate realistically with leadership, and then focus resources where they have the greatest impact. So a successful reset isn't necessarily about catching up on every task, but it's about making sure you're moving the most important work forward and giving leadership a clear picture of any remaining risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that comes back, that supports what I was talking about earlier with the balance,
Mhm.
kind of having a balanced
Yeah.
scorecard, having here's, here's the issues that we have, here's the risks that creates for the organization, here's what's working well. But if we want to improve these things that aren't working well, which ones do we really need to focus on, getting those priorities, and then get the resources where they'll give them to you, and where they won't, then you just need to balance that with here's risks. I need some risk acceptance on these. And whether they give you outward risk acceptance or not from a leadership standpoint, every day people are inherently accepting risks, whether they think about it or not. By choosing not to do something about it, you end up just having, some kind of acceptance. And whether you accepted a risk or not, if you're impacted by it, you're still impacted by it, and you have to face those consequences. So you have to deal with that. So at the end of the day, I love that, Laura. Heidi, what you said there about prioritizing. You really need to go back and look at what is the most important thing that you're not getting done, and just start processing that. And don't let yourself get caught up by not getting anything done because you try to do everything.
That's really practical advice. And going back to not causing chaos in an organization, what are the 3 top things an organization can do this month to get back on track for the rest of the year?
So if I had to pick 3 things to do this month, I always take it back to the fundamentals. So number 1 is gonna be refresh your risk register. A lot of the times we're doing, annual risk assessments anyway, so, we just need to make sure that the understanding of the risk still matches the reality of the business today. Number 2, review your vendor risks. Third parties can introduce a significant risk, especially if we have like incidents or breaches or things like that that happen throughout the year with those vendors. Um, that's something that you need to look into, and it's easy for reviews and follow ups to slip when everyone's focused on projects. So make sure you reevaluate those vendor risks, and then number 3 is confirm ownership. So look at your major controls, audit findings, and initiatives, and make sure that there's a clear person accountable for each one. So those aren't like big glamorous things, but they do provide that visibility, and they help drive accountability and usually reveal exactly where the most attention is needed in that moment.
That makes total sense, and I always tell my runners to start with the fundamentals and the basics, so same thing with the GRC program. So let's do a quick closing thoughts. Joe, do you wanna lead off?
Yeah, I have 3 takeaways. I'll keep with the groups of 3. If you don't have the right process in place to ensure your program is truly risk-based, then and it allows you to continuously measure the compliance to your approved framework, it'll be nearly impossible to write good business cases that result in getting the budget you need approved. So you really need to have that program and an alignment. And the second one is, if you're not monitoring your program for what's working and not working, you won't find out what you need to improve until it's too late. So you need those like leading indicators of, are things on track? And if you don't use your budgets responsibly and keep leadership informed about the progress and the residual risks, you won't be able to show that your program is under control and properly balanced against the risks that leadership have chosen to accept, or what they want to invest in having you correct.
Makes sense, and Heidi, keeping with the rule of threes, what are your top 3 takeaways?
Keeping with threes, visibility matters. You can't manage risks if you don't understand or measure. Accountability matters. Every major risk and initiative should have a clear owner, and continuous improvement matters. So, mid year is not about finding perfection, but it's making those adjustments before those small issues become major problems.
Thank you very much. Really great insights today. If you're listening and wondering whether your cybersecurity program is truly on track for 2026, now is the time to assess, prioritize, and reset. Thanks for joining us on CISO Side Up. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with your team, and connect with us to learn how CISO helps organizations turn strategy into execution. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.